Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and today I have the final review of the books that are currently on my recently read shelf that I have not reviewed yet. By the time you will see this video, there might be more, there might not, who knows. Anyway, today I want to talk about a series that I, as of filming of this video, only finished a few days ago. And that series is the Gael song by Shauna Lawless. If I remember correctly, I do have a spoiler-free review of the first book, which, unless I'm completely wrong, I will of course leave down below. However, after finishing this series, while reading the third book, I didn't necessarily feel the need to make a full series review. However, after finishing it, I definitely just want to talk and gush about the series. So that's why I decided to sit down and film this video. So first, the Gael song is a trilogy. There's 3 books. First was The Children of Gods and Fighting Men, the second was The Words of Kings and Prophets, and the third was The Land of the Living and the Dead. I read both the second one and the third one as an arc. The third one, as of filming of this video, in fact, isn't even out yet. I think it comes out on the 17th of September, and you can tell that I was already really enamored with the series by the second book because I got a physical copy of it, even though I had read the arc. There's also 2 novellas that I do not remember the names of right now. The first one I did read, I also had an arc of that. The second one I sadly didn't get an arc of, so I haven't read that yet. I'm gonna have to get it another way. Anyway, what is this series? This series is historical fantasy, and it's historical fantasy set at the end of the 10th and beginning of the 11th century in Ireland, which is a time in Irish history when Vikings and Irish were still kind of fighting for dominance over the island. And so you had some places in Ireland that were more so under Viking tradition and rule, and others that were under old Irish tradition and rule. So yeah, that's kind of to the background. I do also really appreciate that the author in all of the books has little afterwards also talking about the historical context, because quite a few of the characters, in fact most of the main characters in this series, are characters taken from history. However, from a time of history where there aren't that many written records, so you know, there's room for interpretation. And also the author herself did talk about when she consciously changed historical stuff and why she changed some stuff and what stuff was important to her to keep as close to historical records as possible. She also takes some historical characters and turns them, let's say, legendary, because at the center of the conflict, while the setting of the story is this time in Irish history between the Vikings and the Irish, the central conflict, or one of the central conflicts of the story, is the conflict between the Fomorians and the Tuatha De Danann. I am also sorry, I will mispronounce a lot of names and stuff and everything in this video. There is technically pronunciation guides, however, I have to be honest, pronunciation guides don't help me a lot. I did also technically take 2 semesters of Irish at university, one semester which was purely Irish pronunciation and another which was Irish grammar. However, first of all, Irish pronunciation can vary wildly depending on where exactly you're from in Ireland, and I think my teacher was from Western Ireland, and then also I have forgotten everything, so that's on that. Anyway, the central conflict of the story is between Fola and Gormlaith. Fola is one of the descendants. She's a healer, and the descendants for a while now have decided to completely cut themselves off from humans. They believe that because of their mingling and mixing with humans, their powers have waned. However, at the beginning of the first book, Fola is sent to like King Brian's court, who is one of the Irish kings with motivations to become High King of all of Ireland. And she's sent there as a spy so that she can tell the descendants what King Brian is planning. The other character that we follow is Gormla, who is a Fomorian. The descendants and the Fomorians have for centuries fought each other. However, the descendants at the beginning of the story believe that all Fomorians have been eradicated. So Gormla, on the one hand, has the motivations to find the last few descendants, of which there are only a few hundred, and also to keep herself and her son safe. Gormla is basically immortal, like she can be killed but not by old age, and she's also the queen of Dublin. So she's the wife of the King of Dublin. However, she's not his first wife, and so her son, whom she dearly loves, is like 8th in line of the throne, and she knows that once the king dies, her son is probably not long among the living anyway, and so that's kind of her secondary motivation, wanting to keep him alive. And so that's kind of the setup of the beginning of the first book, but now I've talked long enough already what the series is about, so let me share my thoughts on it. And first, for the negative things. My main gripe is still the same gripe that I've had when I talked about the first book, and it's a gripe that I talk about with a lot of different books. And that is that, generally speaking, I don't really care that much about first-person narration. I'm not a big fan of it, even if it's just one POV. Like, I usually only really love first-person narration if something is consciously done with it. Otherwise, I'm like, okay, take it or leave it. I don't really care about it that much. Something, however, I do a lot of times actively dislike, which has become more and more common. I'm sorry, there's like a motorbike outside the window. Anyway, something I dislike that has become more and more common is multiple POVs, still first-person narration. The thing is that I can count on one hand the books and the authors who have managed to use that type of narration and give the characters like extremely different voices. For me, the type of narration where I will actively praise it is only if I do not have to look at chapter headers and within like a few sentences instantly know who the POV character for this chapter is. That is not the case in most first-person narrations where there's multiple POV characters. It's also not really the case in this series. However, since there are so many books with that type of narration, I assume that maybe I'm like kind of an exception to disliking it that much. With this one, I'm gonna say like I didn't mind it. There's books where I do actively dislike it. Books generally do have to work harder though for me to give them above a 3.5 stars if they do that type of narration. This entire series, I think I gave each book between 4 and 4.5 stars. So you know that there's a lot of things that I loved about this series that I gave them such high rating even with that type of narration. I will say though that in the last book, I had the most troubles with it because aside from our two POV characters, Fola and Gormla, we got other POV characters as well, still in first-person narration, and I was like, I think we got a total of like 4 or 5 different POV characters. Wasn't a fan of that. Didn't like that, like, at all. Anyway, so that's my main gripe with the series, to be honest. I can't necessarily think of anything else. I can only think of some things that I think might bother some readers. And there I right away want to talk about something that I loved that I think some other people might mind a little bit. And for that, I need to talk about the ending. I will still keep things spoiler-free, so I won't tell you whatsoever what happens at the end of the story. However, what I will tell you is that the ending is probably more open than some people might enjoy. A lot of the ending is set up for future books also, where we will probably follow some of the same characters, follow some different characters. But something that also did for me is that because the ending is so open, is that it made the ending incredibly tense, because what it enabled the author to do is to draw out the tension and like what exactly is gonna happen until almost the end of the story. I was writing to Scylla like 30 pages from the end, and was writing her like, I'm like 30 pages from the end. I still have no clue who will survive. I still have no clue if anyone will even survive. For all I know right now, at this point, everyone could die. And that is something that for me is incredibly hard to do, to genuinely believe that, because I have read so much fantasy and also historical fantasy and so many different books. I know the tropes, I know the patterns of stories that well by now that I'm like, you know, I generally assume a specific outcome by the time the last 100 pages come around. For me to be like 30 pages away from the end and still genuinely be like, I have no clue what's going to happen, absolutely mind blown. Absolutely mind blown. I loved the ending of this story. Again, it is very open. However, it's also like, I personally sometimes love a satisfying setup for a future series. I'm someone who loves open endings, sometimes even if there's no future series in the works. Like, I'm not someone who needs everything to be tied up perfectly. That's just not who I am. However, if you are a reader who really needs that, be aware. Be aware that you might not love the ending, basically. And then the other thing that I think might, I'm not gonna say bother, but that I can see some people complaining about, is how little of an active role Fola plays in the last book in this series. And for that, I kind of already want to talk about characters and why I love the characters in this. The first thing that I will say is like kind of calling back to something that I think I said in my first review of the story, and that is how I love Fola and Gormla set up as antagonistic characters. So you have these two characters that are completely opposed. It's a trope that I enjoy generally, following multiple different women who are like very feminine a lot of times, sometimes a bit less feminine, but who in their views on the world are incredibly different, but where the book doesn't necessarily set one above the other in terms of quote-unquote womanhood. I hope that kind of makes sense. Fola is the stereotypical, archetypical healer. She is also literally a healer. That is her magical power. She is a healer. She is incredibly compassionate. She believes a lot in people, and her kind of personal arc within the story and her story in general is very internal and very internalized. It's about her finding confidence in herself, in others, in what she wants. And while she does have like outside antagonists, specifically her husband or ex-husband, it's like defeating those outside forces. I'm not gonna say if she defeated her husband, but like there's multiple different things. Defeating those outside forces are more so symbolic for what happens inside of Fola. And because her arc to like her personal growth to a very big degree is already finished after book 2, her appearance in book 3 in a lot of parts, while she does still play a role and she like has a lot of very important points or actions for the plot, it's also in big parts more so symbolic, and it's more about seeing her make the decisions that she wants to make for her own happiness and for the life that she wants to lead in future. Which I found incredibly fascinating, and that's actually why I sometimes love writing reviews, because I consciously realized all of that yesterday when I wrote my NetGalley review for a third book. Anyway, on the other side you have Gormla, and Gormla is, with all love, a bitch. She's not a girl's girl, she's a bitch. She cares about getting herself to the top, and usually, like, she hates patriarchy and what patriarchy does to her. She, throughout the series, multiple times is married to men that she doesn't really want to marry. She she uses her body as a way to get what she wants, and she herself rages against the constrictions that are put upon her. However, when women want to talk to her about those same constraints and about raging against them, her internal monologue is often like, just accept it, girl. Like, that's just the life we need to lead, and you're gonna be happy if you just accept it. So she fights to gain her own power, and she fights against patriarchy to gain her own power. However, she would never really consider fighting for the bigger good within, you know, feminism. That's what I wanted to say. And that makes her an incredibly compelling and interesting character to me. Also, within the first book, while Gormla is certainly the more antagonistic character, because she's rough. She's a bitch, she's rough, she doesn't care about people. It's more so as the story goes on that she becomes, or really becomes, more and more antagonistic. And so with Gormla you have almost the exact opposite as Fola, because where Fola's journey is a lot more internal and self-realization, etc., Gormla's antagonism is always towards the outside. She doesn't really self-reflect a lot, like, not gonna lie. It's what makes her so interesting also, because she doesn't see the need to change. She is she's unapologetically herself and doesn't care who she kills to get what she wants. And so her motivations are always, or her goals are always, to the outside of her. And so you have those two very different, not just characters, but also two very different narratives. And I think it's also why we needed those other POVs to come in the last book, which I didn't mind that we get additional POVs, but I just minded that it was all first-person narration, because we needed a more full picture of everything that's happening than just Fola and Gormla could give us. However, something else that just made this shit crazy was that you have Fola, and you have Fola throughout the series just building her little haven of happiness. And then you have Gormla, and you have Gormla scheming and plans and everything. And seeing this happiness that Fola slowly starts building for herself, while knowing what Gormla is scheming and seeing the threats to that, I had so much anxiety, especially during the last book. I was like, oh my god, and I can see how the decisions from the different characters right now play exactly into Gormla's hands, and it's terrible, and I hate it, but also I love it, and it's so good. And honestly, we need more antagonistic POVs, in this specific way. Probably some of the plot points you might be able to guess where things are going if you really know about Irish history. I know some things about Irish history, but I don't really know that much about medieval Irish history. I more so know about more recent Irish history, so I probably could have seen more coming if I had known that. But yeah, I think this review is long enough already. The reason why I really loved the series was absolutely the characters, their relationships to each other, even if they didn't have direct relationships, because not gonna lie, Fola and Gormla, even though the two are the main protagonists of the story, and that's also a really interesting decision, they hardly ever meet, and they don't really have that much of a direct relationship to each other. they don't really know about each other for most of the series. So yeah, that was also really interesting. And with all of that said, I'm gonna assume that once this goes up, most of you haven't yet finished this series. However, if you read the first or even the first and the second book, tell me in the comments down below, are you intending on finishing the series? Did I convince you to finish the series? If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media as well as to my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, where one adult fantasy book written by a woman or genderqueer person per month will be left linked down below, so go and check those out, and I hope I'll see you very soon. Bye!